To do the courts under the Supreme Court for a second time because while I recorded it the first time, I accidentally deleted that recording and uploaded the wrong thing. So, here we go. Federal courts are split into two pretty simple delineations, as we're going to see going forward here. You've got constitutional courts, which are the ones that, simply put, we're familiar with. And then we've got special courts, which are there to deal with a specific thing that the Constitution lays out and that is established then by Congress. So that's going to be international trade, military, taxes, and FISA, which is foreign international surveillance. That's a new one, but that is what you heard during the Mueller probe, is whether or not FISA courts had acted properly or not. We'll talk a little more about that later, but they're relatively shrouded in secrecy for what sort of cases they've actually dealt with, so I don't have a ton of really good examples for you. I can just sort of go through the basics of it. So we might as well just knock that out now because I didn't give you a slide for it because it sort of developed in popularity over the last 10, 15 years. So the way FISA courts work are if the intelligence community / usually the FBI believes that there's somebody inside of the United States that is using some form of usually electronic communications to commit crimes, to work with a foreign government. That's the whole F part of FISA. So say, for example, there is a cell of Iranian operatives in the United States. Then it would be a FISA court that would grant surveillance of that. And the trick with the FISA court is they don't need to get specific publicly with what exactly they're looking for. So think of this as sort of a court behind closed doors. Federal judges will be pulled off of regular judgeships to work these for anywhere between like 3 and 6 years, and then they can come back or not. But FISA courts are basically there to give us better access to spying on individuals. And when I say spying, I mean like investigation of their technology. So that might be email, that might be phones, that might be just an individual and anything they have electronic because they're using burner phones, anything like that could be FISA. So let's move forward into the stuff you guys are a little more interested in. Appointments. How much do these people make? Where do they work? So at the state level, there's a couple different ways you can become a state judge. You could be appointed by the governor. You could engage in what's called merit selection, which is kind of a cool idea. So what merit selection is when a judgeship opens up, there will be an impartial panel of judges that work for the state that will go through all of the people that have been nominated and choose the one that they believe is best suited to be a judge. So rather than it be a partisan vote like we'll see at the federal level, instead here we basically have a bunch of state employees that look and say, hey, this person has the best record as a lawyer or as a judge at a different level, and we think they would be most suited for the job that is opened up. Not done a ton, but I, for one, like that idea. What we do here in Montana is we have elections. It's a popular vote like anything else. 4, 6, 8-year terms depending on position. So, for example, if you are a state Supreme Court justice here, then you are going to serve for 8 years, or like in any other job, until death, retirement, or impeachment in the case of a judge. And on the high end, Montana judges are going to make $130,000 a year. Federal level is a little different. There's really only one way to become a federal judge, and that is the president appoints you, and the Senate advises and consents on that. So just like appointing a cabinet position, it is up to the Senate to approve of a federal judge. So this is all levels of federal judgeships, from district courts all the way up to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Every single one of them needs to be confirmed. This is actually one of the things that the Republicans really ran on in 2016, was their ability to get a number of conservative judges put on district courts, circuit courts of appeal, and the Supreme Court. Mitch McConnell was very diligent about making that his big thing in 2016, and he's done a really, really good job with it from the perspective of his party. Federal judges are going to serve for life, no exception unless, again, you quit, you die, or you're impeached. Federal judges are rarely impeached, but it certainly does happen. It used to happen more often for like drinking on the job, If you want, there's a list on Wikipedia of every federal official that's ever been impeached, and there's a lot of drinking on the job there with federal judges. District Court judge is going to make $169K a year, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Courts, John Roberts, is going to make $255K a year. So, as always, any questions, leave them in the comments of the YouTube video, and I will answer those in the days and weeks to come. Moving forward. District courts. These are the base level of federal courts. These are the only, and this is the big thing here, these are the only federal trial courts. So the two levels above district courts do not have trials. They only deal with appeals. They do not have juries. They only deal with judges. That's the big thing with the district court, which is why there's 94 district courts in the U.S. with about 660 judges across the country. We are rarely ever full of judges. Usually somebody has resigned or passed away. So the feds are always putting somebody else in there. The president's always nominating somebody, and then they don't get to be a judge until, the Senate actually signs off on it. So sometimes there are gaps. But 660 judges across the country, and they're going to hear up to 300,000 cases a year. I apologize if you heard a weird noise there. My dog just woke up, and she's very excited to be looking at this screen. Anyway, with those 300,000 cases, that is any federal crime. So that could be money laundering, that could be murder, that could be smuggling cigarettes across state lines. If the FBI, the ATF, the DEA investigated you for something, you are going to a federal court, and you'll be tried in district court. This map here does a really good job of showing where all of them are at. So you can see we've got our federal court right here. There's a whole bunch of them. There are a ton of maps like that. We will go into what those districts mean in a second. So the districts are the smaller levels. The districts are part of what you would call a circuit. So the word circuit in this context comes out of the beginning of American jurisprudence, and what would happen was different judges, and in the beginning it was literally the Supreme Court. Judges would do what was called ride circuit, and a couple Supreme Court judges would get together, usually like 2 or 3 of them, and they would kind of split up the country. So, these 3 judges are going to go ride the Southern Circuit, and they're going to take everything in the original 13 colonies, or 13 states, from Georgia through North Carolina. And then another one would get like Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, and then the rest of them would get, Delaware north to New Hampshire and Vermont. And so they would ride in a circuit, and they would go to different areas within that circuit, now what we call individual districts, and they would hear the federal cases that were held there. But by the time we get to the 1890s, Congress realizes that the district courts simply have too much on their plate. There are too many cases coming out of the district court. And at the time, if you wanted to go to the Supreme Court, you would go directly from the district court to the Supreme Court. There was no buffer. And that's what the Circuit Court of Appeals is going to do. So the country gets so big, the Supreme Court is literally 3 years behind on their docket because they're hearing so many cases all the time that they're going to break the country up into 12 circuits. So that is the map you see here, which is why they're all different colors. So as you can see, we are part of the 9th Circuit. There's the dog again, sorry. And each one of those circuits is going to have at least 2 courts of appeal. And what happens there is it kind of looks like this. You are going to have a panel of judges, usually a panel of 3, and they will hear your appeal. So you would say, I was wronged in district court. Some procedure wasn't followed, some evidence was suppressed, something bad happened, and I should not have been found guilty. Therefore, please look at my case and determine if I'm right. So the Circuit Court of Appeals has 2 options. They can say, you are correct. Something was done. We are reversing the previous decision. You are no longer found guilty. Or they could say, nope, everything was perfect the first time. You are still guilty. Either way, you have the right to appeal, or they have the right to appeal to the Supreme Court. Now, there are other federal courts before we get to the Supreme Court. You will watch another video on how the Supreme Court specifically works. So we've just gone through the constitutional courts. This is sort of your grab bag here. These are your other federal courts. Largely, they are self-explanatory. The Court of International Trade says if you believe you are being wronged by being forced to pay a custom or a tariff when you are importing something into the country. So are you being charged to import lemurs into the country for study at North Carolina or University of North Carolina's lemur lab? That's a real thing, by the way. Then you would check with the Court of International Trade. Import-export licenses, were you improperly denied, or are you being, investigated for violating that? Are you, in fact, not importing lemurs, but importing, stuffed lemurs full of heroin, something like that? Or are you being accused of that? And, that's hurting your ability to import actual lemurs. Anything like that. As long as it is not dealing with NAFTA, so that's North American Free Trade Agreement, the president currently is in the midst of renegotiating that into what is going to be called the USMCA. But basically North American trade. So the Court of International Trade is going to deal with any U.S. trade that does not deal with Mexico or Canada. That has its own court that we agreed to in a treaty in the early 90s. Next up, we have Admiralty Court, which is even more specific. In Admiralty Court, this is literally just dealing with shipping. So was cargo destroyed? Was cargo stolen? Was there a collision at sea between one or more ships or boats? Was a sailor injured? Guess what? You're going to Admiralty Court. Now, I do want to point this out. This is not true. This is a conspiracy theory that's been around for years, and I just wanted to debunk it. Admiralty courts originally did have gold fringe on their flags. However, the gold fringe being on a flag does not denote that you are necessarily in Admiralty Court. Some judges just like to have the gold fringe because they think it looks fancy. But what people will say is, oh, it's trimmed in gold, therefore it's an Admiralty Court, and I am answering to martial law instead. It's a load of hooey. Don't believe that for a second. It really is just an aesthetic thing at this point. Is they will tell you what sort of court you're in. You can't just make it up on the fly. Then, lastly, we've got Bankruptcy Court, which is why this is here, because this is from an album called Bankrupt. If you're bored at home, listen to Phoenix. They're a good band. So what happens here is because bankruptcy is such a specific thing, we've created our own court system for it, basically. They're based out of district court offices, and they're going to be heard by specific bankruptcy court judges. Now, there's a couple different types of bankruptcy. I have collected the most common ones here on the left, just to sort of walk you through it, because you might hear about this in the news, so I thought it best to give you a little bit of context for it. So, Chapter 7 bankruptcy basically says, I literally have no money. My wallet is empty when I open it up. Moths fly out. There is no money, so take, what I've got on me. I'll empty out my pockets. Here's 45 cents, and I'm going to start from scratch after this. My credit will be destroyed, but, I literally have no money, so stop coming after me. Then come the two most famous ones. Chapter 13 is another personal bankruptcy one. And that says, I've got money, but I don't have enough money to actually pay off all of my debts. So with the help of this court, I'm going to establish a payment plan to pay off this debt. So you would put maybe a lien on someone's house, or say that a certain amount of everybody's paycheck has to go to paying off debts. So eventually, in theory, with Chapter 13 bankruptcy, you will pay off all of your debts in a structured fashion. Chapter 11 is business reorganization. So that's basically saying our business is bankrupt right now. We are not going to be able to pay for everything. So instead, we're going to reorganize our business, refinance a bunch of stuff, and hopefully that will stave off bankruptcy. So maybe, you're an airline and you're going to cut all of your flights to a certain area, or your big airline, like, you own Alaskan Air. So you cut Alaskan Air from there, or you sell them off or something like that. But this is reorganizing your business. Chapter 12 is like Chapter 13 bankruptcy, but for farmers specifically. And Chapter 9 is what you saw if you've watched later seasons of Parks and Rec, which is a city or a town is bankrupt and they need to reorganize. So there's our little aside on bankruptcy. Let's keep rolling here. Armed Forces Court of Appeals. If you are in the military, you do not go to civilian court for breaking the law while in the military. And what is clear here is, what needs to be clear is while you are in the military. So if you are a Marine and you are off duty and say, you've been granted leave, you go home to Florida and, you get caught with a bag of drugs labeled bag of drugs, you've broken a Florida state law. You are going to Florida state court for that. But if you are engaged in a military action, and I don't mean like war, I mean like you are doing your job for the military, you are not on leave, and you are, say, driving around and you have, I don't know, a severed head in the trunk of your Humvee, at that point you will be tried by what is called a court martial, literally a martial court, a military court. So there's 3 tiers of severity here. First tier is basic martial punishment. You don't even get a lawyer for that. That's what counsel means here. The military says you broke our code of conduct. We're punishing you for it. There is no appeal. The rationale behind all of this is that the military, because it is such a structured organization, needs to be able to crack down on people faster and harder than a civilian would, because lives are at stake. As someone within the military, they're defending the country, right? They are not going to follow the regular federal law that you and I would fall under. Instead, they are doing this based on military law, what is called the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Sorry about that. Uniform Code of Military Justice, right here. And that is basically the laws written by the military. Double jeopardy, yeah, you can be retried in military court. Again, it is a different thing, and we need to hold people to a very, very high standard with that, because if you are giving someone, say, like an F-35 to go fly and more evidence comes forward against them, you should be able to retry them so we can get them out of the seat of, a dangerous weapon. Not going to have a normal jury. It is not going to be a jury of your peers necessarily. It will be military officers, and they're going to act as the judge and as the jury. They might have some sort of legal training, but that is not in any way, shape, or form a guarantee that they have legal training. They will be based in the law, and usually you'll have at least one person there that will have experience dealing with that sort of stuff. And that will usually be the commanding officer that will have the final say on that punishment. You can appeal, like it says right here, Military Court of Appeals. And with that, it would be the same as appealing anywhere else. But again, no special treatment here. They're just going to look this over. You will appeal. Your counsel here as well is going to be based out of the military. You do not want a civilian lawyer in military court. It is a different story altogether. Couple more things to go, but we're in the home stretch. Tax court. There's no way to spin this nicely. This is boring. Tax court is created in 1969 specifically because judges weren't quite sure when they were doing what are called bench trials as to how to rule on tax code, because the U.S. tax code only gets more confusing as the years go along. 19 federal judges. They're appointed by the president to 15-year terms from previous positions. And they deal exclusively with civil arguments over the U.S. tax code. So this is not if you dodged your taxes. This is if you are disputing what you are being taxed and the way the law is being implemented by the federal government. I'm sure if you are a tax attorney or somebody like my aunt who loves taxes, this is super awesome to you. For the vast majority of the American citizens, this is what could only be described as crushingly boring. This is basically people suing the IRS saying you're doing a bad job. These guys still essentially ride the circuit because there's 19 judges. They have to go all around the country and hear these cases. But presumably these judges like doing this sort of thing, and it is not a burden on them. And that's it for us, folks. The next one will go on to the Supreme Court. And as always, if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.